Hello to everybody who's here. I am Joe Brummel. I work at the Wassaic project. I'm the communications coordinator, and I also run our artist interview program. This is our fifth featured artist talk with Andy Van Dinh, who is to my left and maybe to my left on your screen as well. Andy is a Canadian-born artist currently based in Bed-Stuy. He was in Wassaic last September for a month working in the barn, the studio closest to the outside, which is the studio that everybody wants to have. And then he is now in our 2020 summer exhibition, which is available online at wasaicproject.org/2020 summer exhibition, and in the summer exhibition publication that we put together for the show. He has 3 pieces in the show, and I am very excited to talk about them with him for the next hour or so. The format of this talk is going to be roughly 20 minutes or so of conversation between Andy and I, after which we will open things up for any and all questions that you folks have. Yeah. How about we jump in, Andy?
Sounds good.
Great. So I want to start by talking about one of the titles of one of the pieces in the show. So I'm going to pull it up on my end here. And give me a second to share my screen. So this piece is called Obstruction Ephemera 4. Can you say a little bit about the title of that piece?
Well, I guess, I'm really bad at titles, so this has been like a kind of a series that I started maybe in 2016, where I kind of made my first, I want to say my first abstract drawing. And I kind of named it that as in just, I was trying to render like invisible obstructions in my life. How would that look? And how do they kind of transform into other forms or things? So it kind of became like, one, I title things that when I don't know what to title, but also it kind of has like it's like a running idea that I want to do like a constant series throughout my life. So it basically is just like these obstructions that keep changing as I grow and as I even draw the pieces.
Can you say a little bit more about that note on quote, invisible obstructions in your life? Like, what are you talking about? I don't know if maybe it is a specific thing you're talking about, or maybe it's something more abstract. And I guess the follow-up to that would be like, how has your relationship to thinking about those obstructions changed over the life of the series?
Right, yeah, let me just quickly switch to my headphones.
Cool.
Can you say that again?
I was asking about the note you said about them sort of referencing, you said invisible obstructions in your life. I just wanted you to say a little bit more about that, and then also sort of as like a follow-up, how you have, if your relationship has changed to those obstructions over the lifetime of that series.
Right, I mean, I guess when I mean invisible obstructions, you kind of start noticing, or for me at a certain age, I started noticing these social forces or things, that you don't really realize has an effect on you on a daily basis. Like, being a person of color, you don't realize how there's certain things that change the way, even just the way you love or express emotions or communicate. Just simply communicating is just a totally different thing. Mm-hmm. And that comes from just all these different societal pressures or rules that you feel like you have to follow. The way they've changed, I guess, like the more I'm aware of them, the more That's a good question. I mean, the more I'm aware of them, the more I can deal with them, but you're always finding something new every time I make one of these pieces or think about that, you're always finding something new about yourself that you never realize is like maybe something you had no control over.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to reshare my screen so we can talk about this piece specifically a little bit more. Can you, if I'm correct, this is a piece that you worked on while you were in Wassaic, right?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about just the creation of this piece process-wise? Like, I'm interested in your relationship to the material specifically.
Right. I mean, I started doing charcoal ever since I moved to New York, which was like the end of 2015.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a way for me to just like really loosen up because I was making really tight drawings at the time. So what I usually do is I'll just make a mark, I'll either lay the whole piece of paper with charcoal and then I'll start erasing. So it's really just a reaction to a reaction where I kind of just freestyle everything. And I never know what it's going to look like. I don't even know how big they're going to be. Usually they kind of just extend off the page and then I'll have like this mosaic of sheets of paper, like creating like a smoky image.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You mentioned there that you start with charcoaling the whole page and then erase from there.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that in that part of the process in particular? Like that,
yeah,
how it's like erased rather than drawn. You don't go from blank to drawn, you go from full and then erase everything out.
yeah. I mean, it's an interesting way to create an image because it feels more like I'm excavating. It feels more like I'm digging or searching for the light. Like black and white images are all about light usually. And it feels like I'm not creating light, but rather trying to find it.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of informs the shapes and the lighting that falls onto these shapes. So yeah,
I was just going to ask if that has always been a process for you, or was that something that a process that you discovered through working with them over time?
I think it's been a recent process, but I think it did start when I was painting. I was more interested in like wiping paint off. And it started with my master copy. I did a master copy of one of Michael Borman's paintings. And, I really had to study how he created certain textures. And I found a way where, you're scraping off paint rather than adding. And that kind of, I don't know, something about that is, it feels like it's about negation or something you can't see, and then discovering that.
Yeah. I also want to ask about your relationship to color, specifically your relationship to not using very much color. So there are a few paintings on your site that use colors, and then it seems like since then you've mostly moved towards exclusively using black and white with the charcoal. Can you talk about that? Like why the rationale behind that?
I mean, color is a scary thing.
Say more.
And I think when I first started painting, it was just like, whatever, I can choose these colors, and that's great. I love that. But then, like, you kind of, maybe it's an academic thing, but then you're always questioning why. Like, why am I choosing this color? What does this color do? And it just felt like such a chore.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell myself, I'm going to go back to color. It's just inevitable. I see color. It's not like I see black and white. But going back to black and white was almost a way to study what color can and cannot do and what black and white can and cannot do. But I don't know, I've stuck to black. I mean, I don't know. I feel like 4 years doing black and white is not that long in terms of the rest of my life.
I agree.
So, yeah, I'm still trying to figure out my relationship with color because like, I wouldn't say I am, it's really weird when, you know, professors or people say like, that person's palette is really mature or sophisticated. It really doesn't make sense to me yet. Maybe that's what I'm still trying to like figure that out.
That does sometimes feel sort of just like a default, like, I know how to talk about art comment.
Yeah. But I think I don't know, it's really weird. I think I was just struggling with like, how do you find a way, or how do you intellectually talk about something that's so intuitive? There is a way to intelligently talk about it, but I just don't know how.
I'm wondering if we can sort of move this conversation to a little bit of like a test case, because the piece I see over your left shoulder is actually integrating some blue into it. So yeah, not to put you on the spot about this piece, but
Right.
Can you talk about like what it was like for color to reemerge in that piece and what that has looked like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the thing I focused most on when I was at the residency, the Wassaic residency, was like really making the first move is something I don't normally do.
Mm-hmm.
And for some reason, it just seemed fitting to start with color and then go from there. And maybe that, I thought that would be my intro to using more color. But I think actually it kind of scared me a little more. But I feel like watercolor is maybe more closely related to drawing, so it doesn't feel as daunting. And it feels like I can incorporate it more into my drawing, if that makes sense. Like, I don't really have any plans to be a painter, but I do want to use color. But I relate color to painting so much.
Yeah, which is an interesting default. I mean, it's interesting that like the obvious question for me to ask in the first place is like, why is the palette just black and white? Like, that's sort of an
Right.
assumed default there. Like,
Right.
art equals color in it, but
Right.
and I think that what's interesting about your work and the way you're talking about it is that you're sort of questioning that default of like, wait, am I just putting in color to put in color, or am I actually considering like the choices I'm making about that color?
Yeah, it's a tough situation.
Yeah. To move away from the color discussion, I also want to talk about your relationship to carbon paper as a material. Can you say a little bit more about your relationship to that material?
Yeah, I started using like transfer carbon paper. It's probably been 2 years now, um, and I just saw it at Blix. I just saw it in a roll, and for some reason, it just felt so oddly familiar. And then I realized I grew up with it. My mom, she reupholsters furniture, and she's a seamstress, and she makes draperies, and it's always been around. It was always in piles or folded and, you know, on a shelf. And it just felt, I don't know, it was just a weird calling that I needed to use it. And then it became this idea of using it as the drawing. And then having it, it's like, it's a tool to translate things, but I'm not using it to show you what I'm translating things onto. So then the carbon paper becomes an in-between. It's not the original pattern. it's not the copy, it's the in-between. So it was like this thing to talk about the state of being in between, whether that's limbo or just, you know, feeling displaced. It was a way, and I'm still trying to figure it out, but it's, for me, my main goal is trying to relate it to my mom, relate it to the older generation who had to deal with the diaspora firsthand. And, you know, it was just so fitting because it talks about labor. It talks about clothes and skin. And then when I'm using it, it kind of creates like a map of movement and cutting and dissecting, and all that kind of feels related to my parents' story.
Can you, if you don't mind me asking, can you elaborate a little bit on your parents' story, and then it's like specifically how that works its way into
Right.
the way you explore your practice?
Right. I guess for those who don't know me, my parents came from Vietnam, like during the Vietnam War, and I don't know exactly what year, but it was like kind of the end, and that really has molded my practice. I mean, I didn't start thinking about it until I moved here, but it's really been an influence on my work as trying to figure out just how do I fit in, and also like going back full circle, how do these social forces that come with being the son of immigrants, how does that affect how I deal with the world? And it just seems like this idea always just naturally comes into my work, whether I try to or not. So it kind of just seeps through my pores at this point. And yeah, I don't know.
That's what the work is. I always feel weird asking like people about sort of the ways in which like deep personal things make their way into the work, because
Right.
usually the answer is some form of, well, that's why I make art about it, because I can't put it into words.
Right. I mean, it's weird talking. It's like artist talks are always just like watching people attempt to talk about art.
Yeah, I agree. And we are currently in one, but yes,
Yeah.
just sort of being behind the curtain. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have just a couple more questions before we open things up for Q&A. So I actually want to go back to the work in the show and ask about another piece. So I'm pulling up the piece Smokescreen that you actually completed in 2017. And there's a couple things here that I want to talk about. So something that recurs in a lot of your work is water imagery. There's also a lot of pools, which you see here, and then there's also a lot of like tanks inside of a lot of your work. And there are also a lot of palm trees. So this piece in particular feels like a nice way to talk about like a lot of recurring elements throughout your practice. Right. That's sort of giving you like 4 things to talk about at once. Take whichever one you want to talk about and run with it, please. I'm interested in each of those things.
I think most of it relates to water, like this aquarium or water tank, you know, is usually contained with water. A pool is contained with water. Palm trees are usually near a body of water. For me, water was always just like this. I didn't grow up near water. I grew up near the Rocky Mountains. I mean, I grew up near a river, but never like a body of water. So it felt very just weird. It just felt weird. And then when I think about it in relation to like, you know, this giant body of water is what's between me and Vietnam, you know, it's really hard to comprehend. And then I started thinking about how in water you feel free and constricting at the same time. And I don't know, something just really beautiful and scary about that. Um, to a lot of us, water is luxury. Water is to play. Nature is beautiful, but then to a lot of people, nature is very fearful. It's very powerful. Sublime is not just beautiful, but it's also a sense of fear. Uh, so I think that's why I use it a lot, or at least I'm just so gravitated towards it. And it's the same with smoke. Smoke is like this, it's almost like water where like it reveals to you only parts of things. You can never see the full thing. And it's constantly moving. To like be in smoke or fog is very disorientating. And just that feeling, I really try to focus on when I'm making work.
Can you elaborate on that last piece in relation to the thing we were talking about towards the beginning about your process as one of excavation in a sense? I think there's an interesting thing there between the work, again, being in some sense an excavation, and also what you're talking about with smoke sort of like necessarily obscuring things.
Right, I mean, like, to make it very simple and cheesy, it's like me trying to find my way through the smoke almost. Mm-hmm. And trying to find these images. This one, maybe I did do sketches for this. I don't remember, but I've always had in my mind that I wanted to do a tank. And I want to do that to like contain, I just felt like when I was doing these I call them smoke monsters. When I was doing these smoke monsters, they didn't really have an environment. And maybe it was just like just too much smoke. And that's all you read it. You just read it, smoke. There was no context for it. So doing the tank, having that in the back of my mind, knowing that doing this piece would become a tank, was kind of a switch to how I was working, where it was just searching for something. This was kind of like searching and building at the same time. So it's almost like I've learned to control, how to search for things. If that makes no sense, does it?
That does make sense. I like that.
Okay.
And I want to keep talking about it, but I also want to be mindful of the time and open this up for other people's questions. Before we jump into that section, I'm just going to talk about how it's going to work. We're going to use the raise hands function of Zoom for this so that we don't have multiple people asking questions talking over one another. So if you do have a question, use the raise hands function of Zoom to sort of say that you have one, and then I will tell you to come off of mute. You can also just send me a message or send the chat a message, and I can relay that to Andy. And also, if at any point you want me to bring up a specific piece on screen share on my end, I'm more than happy to do that. Just say the word. So does anybody have any questions? Okay, if nobody has any questions right away, I have more questions for you, Andy. So we will keep going. You mentioned in that last answer, actually, oh wait, we do have a question that just came in. So I will hold my question for a little bit. So Rachel Dang is asking, Andy, can you discuss your new projects?
Yeah, I don't really have new projects. That's okay. I'm just trying to deal with the pandy, It's been, actually, I got some great advice from Dionis, who's in this room. I keep thinking about it. It's like, he just told me it's all preparation. Even all the Netflix movies and TV shows I've been watching, it's all preparation, right? and I'm the best person at preparing. I'm just, right? So I got everything on lockdown, like all the Netflix shows. It's all eventually gonna show up somehow. I'm always learning. I'm never not thinking about art, right? Um, and I don't know, I just feel like I needed to take a break, especially with everything going in my personal life. It wasn't really, well, first I wasn't capable of being in the studio as much as I wanted to, and also just the pandy. So it was good to kind of refresh, but I'm really excited to get back into it and start new projects. And I do think I'm gonna just kind of go crazy, start painting, and also focus on the transfer carbon paper. And I also really want to get back into making like more, I don't know if the right word is illustrative work, but more illustrative, maybe more just tighter drawings, just to work on technical skills. And maybe even like bringing the figure. I've never really dealt with the figure, so like that'd be a cool thing. But in terms of new projects, I mean, I'm working on a commission. I am currently designing a monument, but I haven't been chosen yet, but so hopefully I didn't jinx myself, but you know, that's been what I've been focusing on lately.
Great. Does anybody else? Oh, there's another question in the chat right here before I can even finish asking if anybody has any questions. Grace Hager is asking, Andy, is there a parallel between your physical material process of excavating and your conceptual or autobiographical ideas or inspirations?
I mean, besides that, charcoal is kind of like made from fire and smoke, you know, and so I'm using charcoal and then kind of like, you know, working from that. Other than that, it's just a really easy form to erase. It's a really easy medium to just get messy. One of my professors dared me, like she thought I could not be messy, and charcoal was just like, seemed like, it was almost like a statement against her. It was like, I can be messy, watch me. Which, you know, my mom's been trying to tell me the exact opposite. So that was kind of funny. But I think that's something I'm still trying to figure out, like the parallel between, I mean, in terms of physicality, I'm constantly moving in the studio. I don't know, I mean, that's why I don't have a desk job. I have to be moving. So, you know, the drawings are, in a sense, a documentation of some kind of movement or my movement within the studio. And then if you want to even go bigger than that, it's like documentation of my movement in the world. Yeah, so I guess I'll leave it at that. In terms of autobiographical, I think that's why I cling to the transfer carbon paper the most, because that it has like a really personal connection to not just me, but to my family. I don't know if that answered the question.
I think it did.
Okay, cool.
We have another question in the chat from Lauren. It's actually just sent to me privately, and it is asking, Andy, have you reached your 10,000 hours yet?
Ooh, ooh, okay. So yeah, I used to be all about, you know, you got to put in your 10,000 hours before you can call yourself a master. And I have done 10,001 hours. So I can call myself a master. I'm just kidding. No, I have not been counting. I don't think I've reached 10,000. still trying to get at it, but I don't know if that's like, I don't know if I would define that as my idea of success anymore. I think I will eventually reach that 10,000 hours, but I'm not worried about when. It's more about just, being successful is just making the work. As long as you can make work, as long as you find a way to make work, you know, you'll eventually get to that 10,000 hours, and you don't really got to stress about that. But I mean, back then when I was younger, I was like, man, when I'm 30, like I gotta have my 10,000 hours in. I gotta be a master by then. I gotta be an artist, whatever, you know, in whatever sense that means. But I don't worry about that too much anymore. But that's a good question.
I have a quick follow-up to that. It is an interesting contrast between that answer and your answer from earlier, talking about how you've sort of spent the last few months in it's all preparation mode. And you're saying that like that's not, that you don't necessarily think about it as like a 10,000 hours thing anymore. Has the pandemic in particular changed your relationship to like how you relate to like your practice? I guess what I'm getting at is like, I think a lot of artists' advice is just like, just be in the studio all the time and never stop making. And that's the rule. And that's what you have to do. But it sounds like you have a slightly different approach to that now.
I mean, I go through phases where I'm like, I gotta be in the studio constantly. But I think it's always a good reminder that, you know, you can't make art if you don't know things. Like, you know, I only know enough to know I don't know much. So the more I can learn, you know, and I think that's part of being an artist. That's part of our job, is to just put in the research. That research can look like anything. It could look like, you know, just staring at the clouds, looking at forms, or it could look like, you know, the many hours of Netflix I've watched. Maybe I'm just trying to justify the Netflix, but no, but seriously, you know, like I didn't realize sci-fi is kind of a thing that I deal with. It's kind of like, it could be, I could find a way to connect it to my work, and I'm kind of really into that. Like this idea of the unknown in sci-fi, and also the unknown as being like, you know, someone dealing with assimilation. Like if I could link those two together, I think there's something there. One of my favorite presentations I've done in school was, it was actually not about art, but it was just about things you like. So I did this whole presentation on like just TV shows like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Lost. And then, you know, I talked about basketball, like how basketball had a huge influence on me. And eventually these things have slowly creeped into my work. So I think it's really essential for artists, especially, to just step back and be like, you know, how do I switch things up?
I am so tempted to just take this into asking you about Star Trek, because I assume that maybe you're referencing Star Trek as a sci-fi show that you've been watching. But we do have another question. We have a question from Trish asking, can you touch on your growth as an artist in Calgary versus as an artist in New York City, and in what way this change in location has influenced your own art / perspective on art?
Right. I mean, I was just talking to my girlfriend the other day about like how, like when I was in undergrad, even like there was still Google and everything, but you could not search contemporary artists. Like I didn't know what to search. I didn't know who to look into. I was kind of just like stranded. Like I didn't really know what art was really until I moved to New York. And then, you know, I would go to museums and galleries every day, and kind of really just open your mind to what the possibilities are. But not just that, coming to New York was it really was interesting because it really taught me what the studio is for. Um, Especially in the New York environment, things are so fast paced. The studio really allows you to slow things down, to analyze your emotions, and then to really just feel, really, um, and have a sanctuary. Like, I feel like that was a huge lesson that I took from New York. Um, Maybe I could have learned it somewhere else, I don't know, but it took me to move to New York to understand that. And just, I feel more accepted here. I mean, I trash on Calgary all the time. It is hot trash sometimes, but there's I try not to do that anymore. But I really did not feel like I could grow there as an artist. It's just, a lot of people have tried to centralize the art scene in Calgary. It just never really works. Um, it's just, I just feel like I fit in New York much, much easier. And then things kind of align with my goals much easier here. Um, but I understand you can make art, you can make great art anywhere. It doesn't gotta be New York. But just for me, that's what it took for me to be the greatest artist alive.
I didn't mention that in my intro, but
right.
Yeah, for those of you here, Andy is officially the greatest artist alive.
I forgive you. I forgive you. And the most handsome, voted by my mom 32 years in a row, most handsome in the world.
Does anybody else have any other questions? If not right now, I have more questions for you, Andy. In a few answers ago, I forget exactly which, you were talking about how the piece we were talking about, you mentioned that you weren't sure if you made a sketch for that piece or not. Can you talk about your relationship to sketching in your practice? Do you sometimes sketch? Do you hardly ever sketch? Do you usually sketch? How does that relate to the finished product? I guess it's, again, especially interesting in relation to your process as one of excavation. I mean, the sketch is sort of the reverse necessarily. So yeah, can you talk about that?
Yeah, I don't really sketch. Sometimes I'll wake up in the middle of the night and then quickly draw something, or, have an idea and then I'll draw it out. But usually when I do that, it feels like I have a problem with creating products sometimes. Like, or when I was in an undergrad, at least, like, I would know what I was making. And that kind of just didn't work out with the artist I really wanted to be. I really have to not have the end product in mind. I really have to just see it as a way of discovery, I guess. I don't know if I want to say discovery, but in terms of just making something, I can't have the end product in mind. It has to be, excavated. It has to be found. It has to be, I don't know, I can't find the right word, but it's just like, I don't know. It just seems like that's why drawing is so special for me, because it is like straight from brain to hand. I can work fast that way, and I don't have to think about the end product. If I'm just in the zone. Versus like maybe I mean, this is not true, but for me, painting where there's multiple processes, multiple layers you almost have to do. Sometimes I'm thinking too much of how I want this to look like or how it's gonna be. Um, yeah.
How do you know when a piece is done based on what you were just talking about?
I don't think I know, but that's the straightforward answer. But
Yeah, that's fair.
I I really enjoy trying to make work that just, I mean, this is another thing I kind of focused on when I was at the residency was like, don't make anything almost complete, like don't finish anything. And maybe like 5 years, it'll keep transforming into like this one, I'll probably work on it and it might not look like that. And I don't know, something about that is very freeing and keeps me away from the end product. Maybe that's what I need is like a few projects where they never get finished. And then the other ones kind of just like are parts from it, if that makes sense. If I could take parts from one piece that I never finished and, you know, have it as like a timestamp. I don't know if this is making sense, but it's giving me ideas. So I'm kind of just like brainstorming right now.
This is making sense.
Yeah, cool. But I think a piece's finish is like when it's in the gallery, whatever form that is. But that being said, sometimes I do know when a piece is finished, when it's like, sometimes you just know, I mean, we make art because we don't know how to use words, but sometimes you just know that it says enough. Like you're trying to make a sentence with the least amount of words that conveys everything you want to say. And sometimes you just get there. I don't know how to explain it. And this is what we were talking about earlier, is like, how do you talk about intuition in an intellectual way? There's a way to talk about it, but I don't know how. I'm a fool. But I think I'm just trying to learn, maybe, you know. So that question is I get that. I mean, every artist gets that question, but
Yeah, sorry about that.
oh no. But it's always like a tough one to answer. And I think that's why it's still like a top 5 question is like, people just want to know like, how do you know? And the truth is like, we don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, as a writer, I feel the same thing often that, you know, it's interesting to have you put it in like the same terms that I would. It's like when there's nothing more that you can take out of a sentence and you just go, yeah, I think that's good. And
yeah.
when you look back at it a day later and you still think that, then it's probably done and you should stop overworking it or else it's just going to get worse.
Yeah. It just takes years of, it's kind of like freestyle, like battle rapping. Maybe that's an obscure connection, but it's like freestylers aren't actually freestyling. They've worked on these, they have these tools, they know when to bring it up anytime. You know, it's the same with artists. We kind of just know, it's kind of just like these tools are just built into us.
Yeah. I'm tempted to ask about your relationship to freestyle battle rapping, but I also want to.
No.
Okay. I want to open this up again if anybody has any more questions at this point. Otherwise, again, I have more follow-up questions. Remember, we're using the hands raised function of Zoom. So if you just click to raise your hand, I can tell you to come off of mute and you can ask Andy a question, or you can just type it in the chat. I'll give a couple seconds here in case anyone's typing up the world's most elaborate question. Okay, I have more questions if nobody has any questions immediately right now. So something you mentioned a while back, and I'm sure this is a question you also get a lot, is you mentioned your relationship to basketball, and there's a lot of your work that works with basketball, specifically basketball courts. even the piece directly over your left shoulder, if I'm not mistaken.
Same with this one.
And that one, yes. Can you talk about your relationship to basketball and why it so often makes its way into your work?
I mean, there's one really simple answer, and it's just I love basketball. And, you know, I think I was worried at one point. It's like, that's not enough of an answer or justification to use basketball.
That is enough.
But it is, but like, it was a way for me to assimilate, especially in a hockey city. I always saw basketball as just the opposite of that. And well, and it's cheaper and it's just more convenient, you know. But also just like, I really, you know, I loved watching basketball, and, you know, I learned just as much on the court and off the court. Like, it just felt so fitting. You have this enemy who's trying to stop you from getting to the other side. You have these rules that are trying to dictate you. But if you're smart enough, you can bend these rules to get your way almost. You know, and the greats are great at that. Jordan, Kobe, they're all great at kind of, you know, using the rules to play for them. And that's something I really take from basketball. Yeah, and I just kind of, it kept me out of trouble. So it's, you know, sometimes it feels like an ode to basketball. It's just like, at one point, like, literally, ball is life. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm still trying to discover what basketball can do in my work, and what connections I have to it. But for the meantime, I like to make images of basketball stuff because I like it.
I hereby declare that that is definitely enough of an answer.
Cool.
I also, well, I again want to open up for anybody's questions if they have them at this point. Otherwise, I again have more, but I'll give a few seconds for anybody if they want to ask a question. And if at any point I am asking a question later and you have a question that you want to queue up, feel more than free to put that in the chat while Andy and I are talking, and I can get to it after that. But yeah, does anybody have any questions right now? Great. Okay, I will ask another question then. Which one do I actually want to ask? I actually want to return to some of the work in the show. We haven't looked at the work in a while now, so I'm going to share my screen again. So we've talked about both obstruction ephemera 4 and smokescreen, but I also want to talk about matrix pool. So you were talking earlier about how in smokescreen you liked that you could put the smoke and the water inside of a vessel and contain it in some way. This piece is not that way. Can you talk about this piece in particular in relation to some of what we were talking about earlier specifically?
Yeah, I mean, this is like, it's funny because it's like, it's been a long time since I revisited this piece.
Yeah.
So it's sometimes like hard to think about what you're thinking about. But I remember just really being interested in pools. I'm a huge David Hockney fan. And also pools just felt like something I never grew up with. It was almost like another body of water. You know, it's like a small body of water that kind of represents a larger body of water. And then with the palm tree, I always like thought palm trees were No, it's interesting how people see them as like LA, paradise, but it's also, places that aren't paradise, that have natural disasters like Vietnam. And so I always played with this idea of like pleasantry versus like fear. Um, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it's funny how you mentioned this one is not contained, uh, but I think maybe this one was like the this one was like the precursor for a smoke screen. How do I contain something? How do I create that feeling? Versus like this is maybe like the opposite of that. It feels free. I don't know if it feels free. Does it feel free? I'm not sure. I mean, I tend to use grids a lot sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And grids for me is a way to locate and to measure. And yeah.
To answer your question, I think it does feel free, especially in relation to what you're talking about in the grid and how the grid is sort of being skewed in the top left and bottom right.
Yeah.
Feels freeing to me. I want to once again open things up if anybody has any questions. We have just a few more minutes left in the talk, but if anybody has any questions, put them in the chat or raise your hand and I'll tell you to come off of mute and ask it. Okay, so if there are no other questions right now, I will ask another one. So there's something that you mentioned a while back that I want to talk about again and revisit more in depth. So you mentioned that the pieces that end up getting put in the galleries in some ways to you feel like pieces of a wider ongoing and incomplete process. So this is mostly just like a process of like process question about how you act in the studio. Are you working on multiple pieces in parallel at a given time? Or do you focus on one piece at a time and produce one after another? How does that look for you in the studio?
Yeah, I think I have to work on multiple pieces. It's almost like I can't stay focused on one piece. And that, I think that's why like my earlier works or when I was at Hunter College, they grew so big because, I was just moving around so much. And then I had to have like large sheets of paper to kind of, I don't know, I just really like to move around. And having multiple pieces allows me to do that. And if I don't do that, then it's like what we were talking about. I kind of focus on a piece too much and then it becomes a thing I'm almost too invested in and then it becomes a little too polished. I don't know if I have that problem as much anymore. I think I broke free of that. So maybe it would be interesting to kind of like have a piece where I just work on for a month. But it's almost like, I'm a very patient person, but it's almost like, since I broke that, I don't have as much patience. It's kind of like I lost it, which is weird, even though I know I could bring it back, but it would take a little work. So yeah, usually I'm working on multiple pieces. Usually I have like a piece that's just like whatever. So I'll work on it, I don't care about it. And then ideas come from that. And then if I think of something, I'll write it down or I'll start another drawing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's just like a amalgamation of just like movement and yeah, I don't know.
Great. Does anybody else have any other questions before we wrap up? We're getting close to 6 p.m. Okay, I have one more question for you, Andy.
Cool.
So this has come up. Oh, we have a question from Dianis. What was the first drawing you ever made?
I mean, I remember I made like I remember the first time I learned how to make how to draw a cube. It like blew my mind. Like I know how to draw 3D now. And so I just made like the city out of cubes. And it was actually like, I guess technically it was my first art exhibition. It was like in this mall and they were showing like kids' drawings. And I had these drawings of like the city made of cubes. So that's my earliest memory. And then also, I think it was grade 3, I would draw Power Rangers and Dragon Ball Z characters, and then I would sell them to kids for like $1. So those are my earliest memories. I'm sure I'm forgetting some, but yeah, the cubes. The cubes, I think, was probably my first drawing. Just learning how to draw 3D. That can't be my first drawing, but if drawing 3D is your first drawing, that's like, I'm a prodigy, which I'm not. But yeah, I can't remember anything earlier than that.
Maybe you were a prodigy and that was the first thing you ever drew.
I think you're right, actually. I am
Yeah.
a prodigy.
I want to ask one more question before we wrap it up. So something that we've talked about a few times during the talk is how you sort of spent the past few months in, let's call it a gestation period, kind of like preparing to sort of come back to the studio in earnest again. Is there anything in particular that after this sort of time away, you are excited to explore once you get back into the studio?
Yeah, I'm kind of curious to explore maybe not making work about the diaspora. Like one of my favorite exhibitions was by Carrie James Marshall. And I mean, of course, you know, people are gonna see the politic identity, right? But it really is just about like two people in love or like, you know, whatever he's painting. It's really about emotions. It's really about, you know, and sometimes I worry like, am I gonna pigeonhole myself as like the artist who makes art about Vietnam? I'm not worried about that, but I'm also really into just making work about other stuff. And I think that itself is radical and enough. I think maybe school, there's this weird idea that like you have to have some kind of stance ethically or something in your work. And that's cool, but I'm also really into it's kind of like, that's why I draw basketball. Maybe it's just like, I want to venture into that. Maybe there's something there that's not related to things that I've been recently talking about.
Great. I like that. I think that the art process as one of exploration more than knowing what you want to say and trying to get it onto a thing is exciting. Totally. In any case, we are at 6:02, so I want to be respectful of everyone's time. If anybody has any last questions, go now. Otherwise, we will wrap up our artist talk with Andy Van Dinh. Once again, if you want to explore Andy's work more, it is on the first quote unquote floor of our summer exhibition, which is actually just an online show, and also a book that we published with, it was designed by Studio Bueno and printed by Small Editions, which is a small Brooklyn publisher. It looks really great. I have it across the room right now. Otherwise I'd go and grab it and show you all. It's really great and lets you, I think with Andy's work in particular, kind of sit with the details of the piece and explore them. Our next featured artist talk is in 2 weeks from now, and is actually our last featured artist talk. It is with Madeline Donahue, who is a really, really great painter and ceramicist, who is also featured in the show. Yeah, I think that is everything. Thank you so much for your time, Andy, and thank you so much to everyone who is here for also taking the time to join.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to me attempt to talk about art.
All right, I'm gonna wrap it up and close the call. Thanks so much again, everybody. See ya.